Good morning, everyone. I'm Katie Cartman, Director of Religious Education here at Emerson Unitarian Universalist Church in Houston, Texas. Our beloved community of faith, reason, and affection welcomes all to grow in mind and spirit as together we build a better world. If you're joining with us for the first time this morning, we extend a special welcome and we invite you to fill out our special visitor card so that we can be in touch and get you on our e-blast. Today, our interim minister, the Reverend Michelle LaGrave, leads worship with support from me and Emersonian Dory Wolf on the tech deck. If you have experience with Zoom or if you'd like to learn all the tricks, we're actually looking for folks who'd like to join our tech team, so let me know later on. You'll notice that we've muted you. This helps all of us to hear the service better, and we encourage you to use the chat box. Following the worship service, we'll have coffee hour time, a chance for you to gather in smaller groups to discuss the service and what's going on in your lives.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Mother's Day. Our service this morning will be an exploration of an old and mostly forgotten Hebrew mother goddess, Asherah. Whoever you are, wherever you come from, wherever you find yourself on your life's journey, whichever your pronouns, whether you've walked in or rolled in or dialed in, whomever you love, you are welcome here. If God is your strength and companion, and prayer the means of centering your thoughts, there is room for you here. If the teachings of the Buddha give you clarity and calm in the midst of human striving, there is room for you here. If Gaia's seasonal rhythms lead you best through the myriad steps of life's great dance, there is room for you here. If the still mysterious capacity and power of the mind stirs your imagination and quickens your pulse, there is room for you here. Rest now beside that spring, wherever it is for you. Let us join together in our chalice lighting this morning. Blessed is the dark in which our dreams stir and are revealed. Blessed is the dark of earth where seeds come to life. Blessed are the depths of the ocean where no light shimmers, the womb of all earthly light. Blessed is the light into which we awake, the light that sparkles on the waters, that calls the tree forth from the seed, and calls the shadow forth from the tree. Blessed are we as we move through darkness and through light.
Bring many
Our story today is What is God by Gail Sphar. Once there was a wise woman who traveled from town to town in her country, spending a few days, maybe a week, in each town. People came to her with difficult problems or arguments they were having with others, and she would help them find their way towards satisfying answers. One day, when she entered one of the towns on her route, she heard a lot of arguing. She looked and saw a group of people in a very heated discussion. One person called to her, "Come, come, we need your wisdom." The wise woman approached the group, and the person who had called to her said, "I've been telling people who God is, and they keep saying I'm wrong. I'm worried about them. Help them to see what's right, won't you?" "Well," said the wise woman, "what have you told them?" "Well, I told them there's one true God who loves and cares for us, hears our prayers, and commands us to love one another." She nodded. "You're correct." "What?" said the others. "No, that can't be right." Then one of them said, "I believe there's a God, all right, a God who created the universe, established the laws governing it, set it going, and left. God has no interest in the affairs of humanity. It is up to us to make this world the place we want it to be." And she said, "You are correct." Then a third person said, "I believe there are many gods and goddesses. They are part of my worship and of all of nature and the cycle of life." And again the wise woman said, "You are correct." "I'm not at all sure there is a God," said the fourth. "I see a divine spark in everything and everybody, but maybe it's just part of human consciousness." The wise woman said, "You are correct." "Well, I don't believe there's a God at all," said the last person in the group, "but I am truly awestruck when I think about the mystery of the creation of our universe and how we came to be. I believe it's my responsibility to leave my corner of the world better than I found it." Once again, the wise woman said, "You are correct." At this point, everyone was confused. "But how," they said, "can we all be correct when we all have different ideas of what God is or isn't?" Yes, you all have different visions, but each of those visions can lead you to love and care for each other in this wonderful part of creation we call Earth. And that is the correct vision, however you label it. And as the wise woman left, the people in that group agreed that they didn't need to argue about who was right. They needed to work together to make the world they wanted. And that's our story for today. Giving out of what is our own is a transformative act. As a community of faith, we collect an offering, not for ourselves or our congregation, but to give to others as a collective action of our community and as a way to live out our shared values. Please give with a generous heart to support the May Share the Plate recipient, the Montrose Center. Montrose Center empowers our community, primarily lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, individuals and their families to live healthier, more fulfilling lives. And as always, 25% of your offering will go to Interfaith Ministries Meals on Wheels, feeding Houston seniors. We have 3 ways to give. You can text the number on the screen, go to our website for online giving, or if you prefer to mail a check, yes, we are still checking the mail at church.
This is where I sing gently music. It just helps people to give generously.
As Unitarian Universalists, we share in a living tradition, which carries with it both the obligation and the joy to ever search for new truth, to ever reimagine the great mystery of which we are all a part. And so our meditation this morning will be a beautiful reimagination of an old and familiar psalm created by Bobby McFerrin. Please find a comfortable place in your seats, a comfortable place to be. And if you feel comfortable doing so, take a deep breath in as together we enter into a time of musical meditation followed by silence.
Our reading today is from Unitarian Universalist minister Victoria Safford. What if there were a universe, a cosmos, which began in shining blackness out of nothing, out of fire, out of a single silent breath, and into it came billions and billions of stars, stars beyond imagining, and near one of them a world, a blue-green world so beautiful that learned clergymen could not even speak about it cogently, and brilliant scientists with their physics, their mathematics, their empirical impressionistic musings, in trying to describe it, would begin to sound like poets. What if there were a universe in which a world was born out of a smallish star, and into that world, at some point, flew red-winged blackbirds, and into it swam sperm whales, and into it bloomed crocuses, and into it blew winds to lift the tiniest hairs on naked arms in spring, and into it at some point grew onions out of soil, and in went Mount Everest, and also the coyote we've spotted in the morning in the woods about a mile from here, just after sunrise on those mornings when the moon is full. The very scent of him makes his brother, our dog, insane with fear and joy and ancient inbred memory. Into that world came animals and elements and plants, and imagination, the mind in the mind's eye. If such a universe existed and you noticed it, what would you do? What song would come out of your mouth? What prayer, what praises, what sacred offering, what whirling dance, what religion, and what reverential gesture would you make to greet that world every single day that you were in it? Our special music today comes from Emersonians Ed and Mim Frater. Enjoy Banish Misfortune.
Once, early on a Saturday morning, a drizzly Saturday morning, I went to see the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism. As I sat in this gigantic outdoor football stadium, he said, "Think about this. Every one of us here, some 10,000 of us, has a mother." And he paused for a moment, allowing that knowledge to sink into our very beings. A hush fell over the stadium, so that in the silence I could almost hear the thoughts of others, and I certainly felt the sense of amazement as we each took in this knowledge that we are all connected to each other in such a fundamental way. It's such a simple fact, isn't it? Such a simple fact. We were all born of a woman. And I'd guess it's a fact most of us take for granted, one which we don't think about all that often. It wasn't always so, this taking for granted of new life, disconnection from our bodies, disconnection from nature, is rather a modern phenomenon. Today, in this country, most of us were born in a hospital, in a sterile environment, with quick and easy access to life-saving drugs, equipment, and procedures, with quick and easy access to the miracle of medical technology. For the millennia before the advent of modern medicine, we were born, that is, our human ancestors were born, in the grasses of the savannah, within the confines of caves, under the protection of thatched roofs. Our survival, and the survival of our mothers, was always in question. For our survival, we relied on the wisdom of the women who had gone before, on the oral traditions that had been passed down from generation to generation, on the medicinal value of plants and herbs growing nearby. And we relied on the goddess. We relied on the goddess. Throughout ancient times and ancient cultures, it was the goddess who was revered. Archaeological evidence on this slide we have coming up, this comes from Israel, what is modern Israel, from the 13th and 14th centuries before the Common Era. Next slide. There we go. Those figurines, those goddess figurines, are about 3,500 years old. So in the form of these clay figurines, with their emphasis on the elements of human fertility and survival, tells us that our earliest religious impulse as humans was to worship the goddess. This makes sense to me, for as people we were intimately tied to the cycles and rhythms of nature, of the earth. We knew life and death. We knew the seasons of the year. We knew seed time and harvest in a way most of us today cannot and do not know. And we, that is, our human ancestors, made the connection between human sexuality and reproduction and the implantation of seeds in Mother Earth, for our very survival depended on both. Today, we celebrate Mother's Day. Mothers all over the country will be blessed with brunch, courted with cards, favored with flowers, and showered with small gifts of time and treasure. Joy and good humor abound, such as was sent in this email chain when second graders were asked questions about the relationships between mothers and gods. Here we go. Here's a sampling of just a few of them, just for fun. Why did God make mothers? She's the only one who knows where the Scotch tape is. How did God make mothers? Magic plus superpowers plus a lot of stirring. And finally, what ingredients are mothers made of? Clouds and angel hair and everything nice in the world, and one dab of mean. Of course, Mother's Day is not only joy, good humor, and celebration. On this day, children mourn the deaths of their mothers, mothers mourn the deaths of their children, and some children grieve the loss of the mothers they wish they had had or never knew. When the Dalai Lama spoke to that stadium full of people, reminding us of our common origin from our mothers, I do not know if he was aware of the approaching Mother's Day holiday here in the United States or not. He taught of the importance of a mother's touch, of a nurturing touch in the first few months of human life, of its essential function in brave development. And he spoke of his own mother, telling stories from his childhood. He told us that his mother was a person of great kindness and compassion, and he spoke of being spoiled by her. During the earliest time of his life, in the first 2 years, his mother carried him about on her shoulders, just about everywhere she went. He said that when he wanted her to go this way, he tugged on this ear, and she went this way. And he said that when he wanted her to go that way, he tugged on that ear, and she went that way. But sometimes she wouldn't do as he wished, and he tugged on both of her ears like this. So yes, that story is both funny and cute, and for that reason alone, it's one of my favorites. Without fail, I smile each time I remember him telling this story. To me, though, the wonder of this teaching is its humility. And the brilliance of this teaching is its universality. For all are not mothers, and many shall never be. But we are all children of mothers. We all were born of a woman. All, even Jesus, even Muhammad, even Buddha, even the Dalai Lama. For this teaching gets at the heart of life, of the cycles of life and death, or as the Dalai Lama would say, birth and rebirth. For this is the universal connection of all human life. Earlier, I spoke of the importance of the goddess in early human religion. Yet our culture has developed in such a way that it is a male god who is most commonly worshipped. How did that happen? Where did the goddess go? Did she simply disappear with the advent of monotheism? Almost, but not quite, as we shall see. Biblical scholars and archaeologists have been busy rediscovering and reclaiming the goddess of ancient Israel. In one of the most intriguing stories of the Hebrew Bible, God, who is very upset with the people of Israel, speaks to Jeremiah and says to him, "As for you, do not pray for this people. Do not raise a cry or prayer on their behalf, and do not intercede with me, for I will not hear you. Do you not see what they are doing in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, the fathers kindle fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And they pour out drink offerings to other gods to provoke me to anger." Later in the story, after the first temple had been destroyed and many of the Israelites were exiled to Babylonia, Jeremiah then speaks to a crowd of refugees who had fled Jerusalem, explaining that they cannot escape the wrath of God by fleeing to Egypt. Then all the men who were aware that their wives had been making offerings to other gods, and all the women who stood by, a great assembly, all the people who lived in Pathros in the land of Egypt, answered Jeremiah, "As for the word that you have spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we are not going to listen to you. Instead, we will do everything that we have vowed, making offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pour out libations to her, just as we and our ancestors, our kings and our officials, used to do in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. We used to have plenty of food and prospered and saw no misfortune. But from the time we stopped making offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out libations to her, we have lacked everything and have perished by the sword and by famine. And the women said, Indeed, we will go on making offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out libations to her. Do you think that we made cakes for her, marked with her image, and poured out libations to her without our husbands being involved? There are many, many interpretations of these passages of Jeremiah. Some say that the Queen of Heaven was Ishtar or Astarte, a foreign goddess. Others say she was Asherah. Some say that she was the consort of the Lord of Israel. Others say that she simply represented the feminine side of God. I believe the strongest evidence supports the idea that the Queen of Heaven was Asherah, the wife of the old Hebrew god Gail, whose worship flourished throughout biblical times. William Dever, a professor of archaeology, believes that the writers of the Hebrew Bible, in their monotheistic interpretation, were actually battling a widespread and well-entrenched folk religion, a religion practiced not just by the women, but by the men as well, a religion which revered and worshipped the Queen of Heaven in all of her local manifestations, a religion which worshipped a Hebrew goddess. Yes, a Hebrew goddess through and through. This first slide comes from Ta'anak, which is near the northern border of what is currently considered to be the West Bank. And it is an offering stand. It comes from about the 10th century BCE, so about 3,000 years ago. And if you look on it, counting from the bottom being the first and the top being the fourth tier, the tiers alternate. The bottom one shows Asherah in between two lions. The second is the Lord of Israel, Yod-He Vav-He, are the Hebrew letters for him. The third again is Asherah, and the fourth again is Yod-He Vav-He. And they know that it was never used for burnt offerings or burnt incense, but most likely, according to the passages of Jeremiah, it would have been offerings of cakes and drinks, libations. So let's look at the next slide. This comes from around 800 BCE. This is just two samples of this. These are pillar figurines. They are in the area of Judah, which is where Jerusalem is. Those are goddess figurines. And there are probably about 1,000 of them that have been excavated in the First Temple period. Let's see the next slide there. This is from Kuntalet Arjud. It is in the Sinai Desert, again around 800 BCE. And it's a drawing that was made, reproduced from a storage jar. And the inscription on it says, I have blessed you by Yod-He Vav-He and his Asherah. Thank you. Eventually, as we all know, monotheism and a patriarchal God did win the battle for the religion of the people, or at least most people. Worship of the goddess continued, albeit underground and in secret, and survived through millennia of persecution, finally re-emerging in the light of day, or perhaps by the light of the moon, in the form of pagan and Wiccan traditions practiced today by UUs and many others the world over. Other vestiges remain as well. The goddess has survived in mystical Judaism as the Shekinah, the feminine aspect of God who dwells in this world. And the goddess has survived in all of Judaism as a Sabbath bride. In Christianity, the goddess has survived in the form of Mary, as the human mother of a divine God, a story long familiar to many pagan traditions, especially in the area of Israel. Over the course of time, as human societies grew increasingly complex and more patriarchal, women lost much of their stories, much of their power, much of their access to the divine. Women lost their roles as prophets and priests. Women lost their goddess. There's a story in Judaism which I love about the time in most recent history when women were first entering the conservative rabbinate. It may or may not be a true story, but that often doesn't matter in stories. A male rabbi who opposed the move said, "Women belong in the rabbinate as much as an orange belongs on a Seder plate." If you've ever participated in a traditional Seder, you most likely did not see any oranges on the Seder plate, nor hear about any oranges in the Haggadah. But there are many Jewish women who, having heard this story, now place an orange on their Seder plates each Pesach as a symbolic way of reclaiming their power and their access to the divine. As Unitarians and Universalists, we also have our own proud stories of reclaiming the place of women in ministry. Universalists lay claim to what was perhaps the first modern ordination of a woman to ministry, most likely the Reverend Olympia Brown in the year 1863, but there may have been someone earlier. Unitarians took their turn a few years later with the ordination of the Reverend Celia Burleigh. But lest we be too proud of ourselves, it is also important to remember that the history of women in Unitarianism and Universalism was also sometimes problematic. Our triumphs were more often the exception than the rule. Despite our early ordination of women, many congregations rarely or never called a female minister. And not until 2017 did we elect a woman to the presidency of the Unitarian Universalist Association for the first time. As we journey forward in our quest to regain the divine feminine, I am reminded of some old ideas about the unity of God. In Platonic Hellenistic thought, society was organized in a hierarchy of those thought to be farthest away from God and those thought to be closest to and most like the God or gods. Not surprisingly, slave women were on the bottom of the hierarchy. On the next rung up, slave men. On the next, free women. And on the next, free men. But at the very top of the hierarchy, those thought to be most like God were androgynous or genderless people. A similar line of thought continued in the writings of early Gnostic Christians found at Nag Hammadi. They believed that the end times would manifest as a return to the beginning times, to the time before humans were divided into male and female, when humans were simply one gender. This yearning for unity, for the goddess and the god, is reflected in these words by a UU minister, the Reverend Shirley Ann Rank. She writes this as if from the perspective of Gomar, a devotee of Asherah, who is speaking to her husband Hosea, a prophet of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Lord of Israel. Are our gods so different? Must it be one or the other? Can we not dwell together in harmony? Is Asherah so different from the gods of your ancestors, Hosea? Were they so different, El Shaddai and Asherah, the divinity of the mountains and the God of the air and rain? Forgive me as I forgive you. Even as our gods, the great Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and the great Asherah, forgive us. May they live side by side. Although I know in my heart that may never be, I still pray for it. And someday your world transcending God will be reconciled with my world renewing God. Peace shall reign, and we shall be together again in the land. And so our search for Asherah continues. May we reclaim the goddess while retaining the God. Amen, and blessed be. And let us join together in singing our closing hymn, number 91, Mother of All. Blessed is the light into which we awake, the light that sparkles on the waters, that calls the tree forth from the seed and calls the shadow forth from the tree. Blessed too is the dark, in which our dreams stir and are revealed. Blessed is the dark of earth where seeds come to life. Blessed are the depths of the ocean where no light shimmers, the womb of all earthly life. Blessed are we as we move through darkness and through light. Our circle is open but unbroken. May the goddess and the god go with you, and all the protection they provide. All are one. Merry meet and merry part and merry meet again. Amen and blessed be.
Thank you so much, Reverend Michelle. We've got a couple of announcements, and then it'll be time for coffee hour where you have small group time to share. First up, we've got a special announcement from our own Dory Wolf, Vice President of the Board.
And I know that Martin, the president, mentioned this last week, but I'll just repeat it again because it bears repeating, that we want to let the congregation know that the board has elected to extend the interim period and to postpone the start of the formal search committee process until 2022. And this decision was not made lightly and was after much discernment. But during our past discernment, we wanted to make sure that our search committee was reflective of the goals of our discernment, and that was for a more inclusive and diverse community. And although we reached out and called and got people to bring their suggestions, we have a great list of candidates. We feel that they're not yet truly reflective of our full congregation nor our aspirational goals. So normally in non-COVID times, we'd be meeting, we'd be sharing, we'd be all working these through, but the pandemic, we're reduced to phone calls, emails on this online form. And so while it was thought with great care, it was not ideal. And then there's also the variance between what UUA recommends as the process and what our governmental documents recommend. So we're going to also be working this issue through unrushed and let the congregation review as part of the larger governance review that's underway. So all that said, we will restart in 2022 and Reverend Michelle will be with us as we proceed. And but we have called a congregational meeting for next Sunday after church. And so in addition to the important vote on the request from the Social Action Council that Emerson join the Memorial Assistance Ministries, the board will also be available to further discuss about our decision. And thank you. That was my announcement.